Welcome to The Winning Hand, the podcast about Marvel Champions, one card at a time. My name is Boomguy. This is all the stuff you know. I am joined today by awesome returning guest, three-time returning guest now, Tony Fanchi. How are you?
It's good to be here. It feels like it's been forever since the last time I was on.
It's been ages. No, you were here not that long ago, depending on when this airs, which I don't know yet. But last time you were here, we talked about a card. We had a kind of a standard episode, our 100th episode celebration. This is going to be a kind of mainline podcast episode. And the point for you being here today is just to talk about the game. I have some questions, just kind of have a discussion about the game, where it's at, where you see it going, how your design influences are pushing and pulling the game in different directions. I think this is the kind of stuff people are interested in. So I emailed some questions in advance, as you know, and then we'll just kind of talk through. But I'm super interested to just pick your brain about the game that I am completely obsessed with. So are you ready?
Of course. I love talking about this game.
I hope so. You know, you do it all day and then you talk about it in the evening with nerds like me, and I appreciate it. So just jumping in right away, I wanted to kind of talk about this idea that has been running in my brain recently about a metagame. And competitive card games are very well known for a metagame, and I'm assuming you know what a metagame is, but if you don't, it's essentially just like the current most popular set of strategies and cards that are doing really well in a game that is then influenced when new cards are released or someone finds a counter for it. It's essentially optimizing, and it's most often used in competitive card games. Did I get that right?
Yeah, I would say, to me, an important element of the metagame for the competitive side, and we can talk into how it's different on the cooperative side, is that the metagame is very much anticipating what your opponent is going to do, what your opponent is bringing in their deck, and making deck building decisions for your own deck based on that. And so obviously that is much different in the cooperative game sphere, and we can talk about that.
Yeah. So before we get to the co-op side, have you either played or designed a lot of competitive card games or any competitive card games?
I've played many. I have not worked on one since joining Fantasy Flight, not a card game, but I did do design work for Star Wars Imperial Assault, which had a competitive tournament scene. And so I'm familiar with the design principles that go into designing for competitive games as well.
Let's keep it to Marvel Champions. Did you do any design? Did you help with any designing or test or anything for the Civil War wave, which is our competitive version?
Yeah, I did do some testing for Caleb, and he and I had a lot of discussions before he started the design in earnest on Civil War, just talking about how we would make a competitive mode to this game. We bandied about the idea of what would it take to have a hero going straight against a hero. Is that a viable strategy? Is that a viable way of playing the game? In the end, we decided that there were just too many weird wrinkles to have the heroes going directly head to head against each other, which is why we went with you are taking the side of a leader. And so you're more playing the game that you're used to. You're just doing it in a new format where you're trying to defeat your enemy's leader faster than they can defeat yours.
I'm really fascinated by what you just said. So you mean that early on in development, the original idea or a version, one of the original ideas was that you just had your standard deck as we know it today and you just kind of battled head to head. Is that right?
Yeah, we didn't get to the point of playing that. It was more of a thought experiment about what would the rules require to enable this kind of thing. And really the big issues that came down with were a lot of language. Obviously, Civil War has some language that you have to learn in order to play it competitively. It would have been a lot worse, we think, if you were doing head-to-head combat. Now, anything that hits the villain has to be your opponent's leader. Enemy could be your opponent's hero. Enemy would be hero or ally. Like, how would thwarting work? Would each player
Hmm.
have a main scheme that they're at. There were just too many changes from the core of the Marvel Champions gameplay that we didn't think it was a viable direction to go. And
That's
that's
super
setting aside
interesting.
the fact that the the scaling of damage for the player side against enemies is a lot higher than enemies against players. So you would
Hmm.
have situations where Hulk is smashing their opponent for the win turn one, and that wouldn't be very interesting.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, there are some 9 hit point heroes, and even swinging web kick in the core set is just like you're basically dead if someone
Yeah.
draws it in turn one. So
Hmm.
yeah, that's interesting that you kind of went through, and then what was the kind of flow through? And I know you weren't the lead designer on that, but like that idea then started there, and then how did you end up with the leader idea? Like, were there other stops along the way that you kind of tried out, or did you kind of naturally jump next to what we know now?
I think we pretty much moved to what we ended up with,
Hmm.
because Caleb had designed a similar competitive style of product for the Lord of the Rings living card game, the race against the shadow, I think it was called, which so he was very familiar with this style of play and felt that it would apply very well to Marvel Champions as well.
Hmm. And how do you enjoy competitive mode for Marvel Champions? I'm not asking you to, review it as a design, but as a player, when you stand to play it, like what are your thoughts on it? How do you interact with it?
I really enjoy the 2 versus 2 mode of play
Hmm.
because it gets you the best of both worlds. It gets you both the cooperative play that you come to Marvel Champions for, but it also gets you a new challenge in that you are trying to outrace your opponents. And so those having those decisions where you're looking at like the top 5 cards of the encounter deck because something in your opponent's game gave you the option of picking a
Hmm.
card for your opponents and sharing that information with your co-player and being like, oh, this would be really good, but what about this, maybe, and that kind of fun conspiring together to come up with what you're going to give your opponents for their encounter card is a lot of fun, in addition to just being like, oh, we could take another turn to play down some upgrades and get some building out done, but our opponents, they just advance to the next stage of their leader, so do we feel like we have to advance our leader as well?
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of interesting interplay in the 2v2, and that's the one that I've played the most of in competitive. And I'm not a huge competitive player. That's not what I come to
Hmm.
Marvel Champions for. But in the ones I've played, I find 2v2 to be more interesting because you do have that teammate where you're like, can you handle this turn and I'll handle this? Or like, I just don't have enough damage for this minion. Can you finish it off? Or can you set me up because I've got a kicker on these events? I'm going to play one by one and
Hmm.
kill this and then I'll get extra damage. Like, there's all those decisions that you generally make with the table. And like you said, it's best of both worlds because you get to make it with your teammate. But there's also this element of like, we got to get them. And I love looking at what heroes they have and trying to imagine how those decks are going to play. And you think like, okay, well, what should we give them? I think they're going to be light on thwarting. Maybe we can overwhelm them with side schemes and try to push that way. Or there's just those little kind of moments where you're huddled up with your team and you're whispering and you're like, well, what about this one? Oh, no, I don't think. Let's do this one instead. God, they have Spider
Hmm.
Woman. I think they'll be able to, like that's really fun.
Yeah.
And I agree with you. That's where you get like the best of both.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so this is not a Civil War episode, but that's the closest thing we have here, so I thought it was worth
Yeah.
touching on. Um, and I think the competitive mode, the last thing I want to say about Civil War is in order to make a competitive variant, we had to, I don't want to say water down the experience of certain cards, but they had to become very homogenized. It just in order for
Mm.
balance to work,
Yeah.
right? You can't have an 8 card
Yes.
encounter set and a 4 card encounter set. They have to all be 5. And you can't
Right.
have one that's all minions and one that's all side schemes. They have to kind of have the same components. The main schemes are
Hmm.
interchangeable, but they have to kind of be pretty close.
Yeah.
And
And a
so,
lot of the minions ended up being very similar in stat line, if not abilities.
yeah,
So yes, there were
yeah,
some constraints to the design of that. Yeah, because of the
yeah. And
competitive mode.
It has to be, because otherwise the competitive mode is completely imbalanced, right? Because there's an
Right.
insane amount of different stuff. And so I totally get that. What did you like? Is that something that Marvel Champions is going to move away from? Are we going to see a return to some of these earlier mod sets and cards that are a little more wild? I feel like more recent designs have become a little more constrained in terms of maybe the designers have found their groove, but I feel like there was a lot more variance maybe early on. Some of the mod sets were really, really hard and some were really, really easy, where it seems like now we have a lot more Goldilocks stuff. How do
Hmm.
you, is that on purpose? Have you noticed that? Are you driving that?
It's not intentional, I would say. So I will say first of all that yes, we will be moving away from at least the Civil War level of kind of sanding off the edges and making everything as even in uh power level as possible. And we will be going back to more, these are harder modular sets and these are easier ones. We've always kind of had an ethos in the game outside of Civil War of your first scenario in a campaign box is going to be your least difficult one, and then your last scenario is going to be your most difficult one. And so um we've always kind of tuned the power level of modular sets to the scenario in which they appear in the campaign. And so that I think you tend to have your easier ones in your first scenarios and your harder ones in the last scenarios. There certainly was a time when I first joined the game back in Mojo Mania where I I went very crazy in terms of doing, oh, let's do all side schemes in this modular set
Mm-hmm.
or all minions in this one. And that can be fun, but for most modular sets, we want to provide fun things to interact with decks of all types. So if you're an aggression player, we want to give you some minions that you can pound down. If you're a justice player, we want to give you a side scheme that you can deal with. Um, and so that I think is why we've kind of settled on maybe a similar appearance of modular sets. But certainly when we do have the opportunity to stretch our legs and do crazy things, we do take those opportunities and look for them going
Hmm.
forward. Yeah.
Yeah, I've been going back through the Guardian wave, Galaxy's Most Wanted recently, which is a wave I really love in this game, and I know that predates you. But some of the stuff in there, man, like there's some wild swings, like the Space Pirates mod set that just like removes cards off the top of your deck from the game. It's like an insane
Hmm.
thing that we don't see really anymore. And I don't know if that's because, early on we're kind of trying to establish the boundaries, like you as designers, not we, but trying to establish the lanes of like where are we at here? What are the bumpers? Like how far can we push this or pull that? And I feel like we've kind of dialed it in lately. And I feel like heroes are similar. And I feel like early on we got some heroes that again just wild on either side of the spectrum. We have some that just came in and just either like have one aspect of the game like not available to them. For example, like Drax is a hero that is fun, a lot of people really love, but he really can't thwart. Like he's just isn't a
Hmm.
thwart hero. He has a thwart card, and I guess if you draw it, it can work. But he's really
Hmm.
kind of disincentivized, almost punished for thwarting it all. He has to attack. And I don't see modern designs in the same way of like locking players out of an aspect of the game. And I'm assuming that that's something that you're driving towards.
Yeah, we do always try to design heroes to have hooks into every aspect. There's some hero designs lend themselves better to one aspect or another. For instance, like Cable has a natural home in Justice, but I tried to put things in his kit that make him fun to play in other aspects. For instance, Ascani's son is kind of his protection card.
Mm-hmm.
And so there will be heroes who favor different aspects, but we always try to build in some element that draws them to deck building in each of the different aspects.
Hmm. Um, well, it's interesting. And how do you see overall like the design of the game having changed? And if you want to start just when you joined the game, we can start there, or we can go all the way back, whatever you are more comfortable talking about. But like, how have you seen designs shift up until, we're on the cusp of the Fear No Evil release? We haven't quite had it in hand yet, but we've seen all the cards. So like,
Hmm.
how have things shifted in your time since you've been here?
That's a good question. I would say, taking a more holistic look from the history of the game, I feel like we've gotten better at designing heroes. I think a lot of people interpret the power level of the current heroes as being power creep. To me, it's more consistency. We've designed
Mm.
heroes who are more consistent, who have fewer weaknesses, and we've just learned a lot of lessons that Caleb Grace, Michael Boggs learned in designing those initial heroes and where their shortcomings were so that we can avoid those problems in heroes going forward.
Hmm. How much of that comes from your playtesting, you being the royal you and the team, and how much of that comes from community feedback? Like, how much are you listening to players on Discord or on Facebook or comments in the live streams that you do, and how much of this is just based on you all playing these things over and over again and realizing over time that, wow, X hero hasn't aged well, and I think that's because this card and this card are not scaled to modern games, or whatever the case may be.
Um, I mean, it's hard to quantify it. We certainly do. We are certainly plugged into the online discussions around the game, and we always take those discussions with a grain of salt because only the smallest, most vocal portion of the community are the ones represented by the online discussions. So we try to keep that in mind whenever we're looking at feedback. But we also, like you say, we have playtesters who play this game a lot, and we lean on them for their experience and their expertise a lot. And just we play the heroes ourselves and validate the what things that we are hearing from the online community and from testers ourselves, and say, oh yes, they're correct about this, or no, I think they're missing something here in this opinion.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's where we kind of circle back to my original question. We've gotten there. Like I said, every episode is like a bagel, and we're back at the beginning where we're talking about the meta. And I wanted to ask you about
Yep.
the meta of this game. And so we talked about the meta in competitive games. We talked about Civil War, and we meandered through the bagel, and here we are. How do you see the meta just fundamentally different in competitive games than in cooperative games?
So in because as I mentioned, in competitive games, you're thinking about what decks you're expecting your opponents to bring to the tournament so that you are best situated in matchups against those decks. With a cooperative game, you are choosing your opponent's deck for them essentially by choosing the scenario that you're going to play. And so we as the designers are really providing the opponent to you in the scenarios that we design. And so the meta game is really, I think you could really talk about the meta game as like, what is the meta against a particular scenario or a particular genre of scenarios? For instance, maybe what is the meta game against a multi-villain scenario like a Wrecking Crew or a, a Four Horsemen scenario? Or what is the meta against a scenario where you as the players are advancing, like a Batroc or a Collector? And so I think you could really divide up the meta into those very much smaller buckets. But I think when most players talk about the meta, they're talking about broad deck archetypes. They're talking about player stuff. They're talking about I'm playing the dive bomb meta because I've got my Hone Technique dive bomb deck, or I've got my player side scheme meta with Cable or whomever. And so what we set out to do is we set out to design scenarios that create lots of metas, of wide variety of metas, present players with different challenges that they have to come up with novel solutions in order to overcome. Um, Marvel Champions is different from some of the other living card games, especially the Lord of the Rings. I would say this is especially true of that you have to build your deck for the scenario. For Marvel Champions, we aim for a lower level of difficulty so that you can feel comfortable taking pretty much any hero against any scenario and having a reasonable chance of success with it. But we do still want to make you change the way that you approach a scenario. Maybe you favor this card over that card in this particular scenario. Maybe a scenario starts you out with a minion so that you have to play an attack event early to deal with it rather than taking that first round to set up your upgrades and supports.
And you know, when you're talking about, you know, players defining metas and archetypes and strategies they're using, are you using the feedback that you get from the online community or the community at large to challenge those archetypes with scenario designs and player cards? Are you here to say, well, this is the dominant archetype, now let me invert that with this scenario, or let me push back on that, or let me enhance that with this card? Like, how much are you in conversation with those strategies?
Very much so. One thing I've talked a lot about is that I don't like chump blocking. I don't like using allies as your meat shield and preventing any damage from the villain. And so we've done a lot to disincentivize that particular playstyle to try to shift that meta away from chump blocking and towards using allies in a more interesting way. And we've done that in a number of directions within Fear No Evil itself. For instance, Bullseye has cards in his scenario that remove your allies from the game if he defeats them. We just announced Luke Cage on the player side. We have a card like Righteous Purpose, which says all of your allies, all of your characters even, who are at exactly 1 hit point, get a big buff to their stats. So you have to weigh the decision of, oh, would I rather have this 4 attack or this block of an attack? And so we don't want to outright say, no, you can't play this way anymore, because a lot of people do play that way. And some argue that it's necessary for the game. I don't know how true I think that is. But we want to give you incentives to try to shift your decision-making away from the thing you've always done and get you to consider something that you hadn't done in the past. Yeah.
I love that, you know, you are so direct about your distaste of chump blocking. It's not very gentlemanly, and chump blocking in all of its, you know, uncouth varieties. I do agree with you. I don't find it heroic. Like, thematically, it doesn't feel super heroic when you're like, oh, Spider-Man's gonna shove this person in front of an attack. That like breaks a little bit of theme immersion for me. But I love that you have come at it from both sides, right? The easy way to say is like, well, I'll just punish chump blocking with Operation Zero Tolerance. So you go ahead and chump, but you're going to lose the game because I'm going to tuck those allies into this card. But you've also come from the other side and saying like, oh, well, what about Hawkeye, the ally? He'll give you benefit against minions if you use them to thwart over time. Or about Righteous Purpose. Instead of using that final hit point to protect yourself, you can use it for a big attack or a big thwart. I think it's really clever how you've come at it from both sides to try to adjust kind of player behavior in a certain way.
Yeah.
So I think that's a really good example of how you're interacting with stuff. And like on the scenario side, are you just kind of trying to build a thematic scenario, or are those in direct, like I use the word conversation, but are you directly in conversation with these kind of player cards, or are you trying to push? I guess what I'm asking is, which side are you trying to push more on? Are you trying to push the game forward with scenarios, or are you trying to push the game forward with heroes and player cards? Like, where is the real push that you see as a designer to advance the game?
I think, not to sound wishy-washy, but it's both. I think there are things we can do on both sides that we can use to shape the meta. When it comes to scenario design, we are first and foremost looking at it from a thematic standpoint. What most captures this villain, or the story of this villain scheme that we want to tell? And we when we're planning out the scenarios in a campaign box, we like to think of them holistically and think, oh, well, if this villain is going to be a minion heavy swarm, do we really want another minion heavy swarm here in the campaign? Maybe we should do something different with this villain, even choosing a different character where we don't have those similar experiences in the same box. And so simply by giving a variety of different scenarios in a box, we are kind of by default changing the way that you have to approach each of those, because they're changing the way that you're being challenged by that scenario. On the player side, we are always looking to expand the options of the player cards in the aspect pools. We're always looking for what's the new archetype that we can introduce in this wave. And in the Fear No Evil wave, we have a couple of sub themes running through all of our player cards, or not all, but most of them. One sub theme is Defenders, the trait support. And we decided that the Defenders are not really as close knit a team as, say, the Avengers or the X-Men. And so their supports are more about individual interactions. So we really leaned heavily into the team up cards as being the kind of crux of what the Defenders are all about. And there are some other Defender cards that have yet to be revealed that I think will also kind of speak to how we imagine the Defenders working as a group. We talked a lot about how that team functions, and really they only come together when there's a big threat on the horizon. They don't normally work in conjunction with each other. They mostly are just put together by circumstances. And so that's why they don't have a formal team support, although you could say defensive formation kind of is their team support. But they are more about having individual interactions represented by the team up cards. The other sub theme that we're kind of pushing in the wave is the martial artist trait, which was brand new, introduced in some of the heroes in this wave. And we thought about what do martial artists do? Like what could set them apart in the game? And really what we settled on was martial artists are very precise. They don't waste any movement. They only use as much force as is absolutely necessary. And so there's a sub theme going through the wave of defeating exactly or defending exactly. And so it's through creating these new archetypes that we're hoping to create a new and fresh meta that players can take, not just with the new heroes that are in the wave, but can take it back to old heroes and have reasons to revisit heroes that they've not played in the recent past.
Yeah. One of the things then I want to ask you about in this new wave, we just got introduced to Luke Cage with the article recently. Can you tell me about unpreventable damage?
Sure. So unpreventable damage is, as it sounds, it's damage that cannot be prevented or reduced by card effects. So it goes through tough statuses. It goes through any ability that says when you would take damage, prevent it, or reduce the damage you take from an attack. Those things are all ignored by preventable damage. It basically means you're going to take that damage.
Yeah, I've found that very interesting because it seems to me, and again, I'm not a designer, but it seems to me a way that you are able to play with some of the fundamental rules of the game. And I kind of wanted to ask you about this, and I'm glad you brought up Fear No Evil because it's a good time to talk about it. We have this like original color pie of the status cards, right? There's 3 of them. They correspond directly to the 3 basic activations. They each cancel one of them, and it works really well. It's very simple to explain, right? Like, oh, this one cancels the attack, this one cancels the damage, whatever. And unpreventable is a way that you've created almost like a half status card. You've created like, well, now we have this like tough 0.5 card that allows us to still not, it's not piercing, it doesn't just negate that, but it does allow us to keep the tough, but play with it in different ways. And I'm wondering if that's on purpose, if there was an intentional way to design kind of a midway or a halfway of dealing with tough, or what was the inspiration there?
So Luke was designed by my co-designer Aaron Haltom. So I don't want to put any words in his mouth, but I think unpreventable damage basically was born of necessity. He
Mm,
wanted a way for Luke to have lots of status cards and not get destroyed by piercing.
mm,
And so he gave him an ability that prevents piercing, but also gave him this drawback of having so many tough status cards because uh, we also have Colossus in the whole I can have lots of tough status cards and I have easy access to them. So we wanted Luke to feel a little bit different. And one of the thematic elements of Luke is that even though his skin is unbreakable, his insides are not pure steel like Colossus's are.
mm,
So that unpreventable damage is more like internal damage to his
mm.
organs and his muscles that he takes from the impact of bullets or knives or whatever psionic blast he's being hit with in a particular fight. And so that was, I think, the origin of having unpreventable damage, but it is certainly a tool in our toolbox now that we can use going forward to present, as you say, kind of this you might think of it as a counter to the tough meta.
Mm.
If toughs become super ubiquitous and something that players are using a lot, maybe because their chump blocking strategies are no longer working for them, we can introduce this unpreventable damage as a way of getting through the toughs without completely negating the abilities of toughs. Because one thing that we've learned with player reactions to things like Stalwart is that turning off player abilities feels very bad to players.
Mm.
And so we don't want to make your Miles Morales completely impotent against a villain by giving them Stalwarts printed on their villain card. So for the same way, we don't want to give every villain piercing and make Luke, or I should say Colossus, feel really bad going up against any villain in a new campaign.
Yeah, I didn't know this about you. I just learned that you're a bit of a sadist. So first you're going to teach players to no longer chump block and rely on these tough cards, and then you're going to give them unpreventable damage to negate their tough cards. As I'm learning about you all the time. No, I really think it's an interesting solution. Like instead of this binary, you have tough or you don't have tough. Now there's this, and there was like just the one stop solution of like, well, piercing. It's just relevant. Now you have this in
Mhm.
between space of you can still be tough for big attacks, but sometimes you're still going to take damage. And I think that's interesting. And and maybe I don't know if you can say or not, but is that keyword something we're going to see, going forward, or is that strictly for Luke and the necessity that you talked about?
I can say that I am working with it in my current design. So it will be a thing that you can see in the future.
Okay. Yeah, that's good to hear. I like when keywords come out and then aren't forgotten.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it feels like, you get an influx of a keyword for a campaign box, and then it can sometimes feel like it's fading. So it's good when, things build over time. Vulnerable
Yeah.
was one that came up a couple boxes ago that I really thought was clever. And
Mm-hmm.
I hope that sticks around too as another one.
There's more of that in Fear No Evil. One that my other co-designer Frank Brooks was really excited to bring back was the temporary keyword that
Mm.
basically only existed in Cyclops, but it plays a big part in the Fear No Evil wave.
Mm. I think temporary is really clever too. And I know, it was one of those that felt like it was created for Cyclops and then it was kind of just forgotten.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that feels bad as a player when you learn this mechanic and this keyword and you wait and wait and wait. And it's like, well, it's maybe not coming back. And this is probably
Mm-hmm.
not the time to bring up the pool aspect. So we'll leave that alone. Um, but to circle back to what you said a few minutes ago, you talked about, the intellectual property of Marvel is obviously the overarching, it's just the everything here.
Mm-hmm.
Without that, you don't have this same game. It's totally different. So how do you satisfy, when you're designing something, how do you satisfy that kind of top-down design to make sure you're hitting the theme of the incredibly important and popular intellectual property, but also balancing that with this kind of bottom-up design that counters the metagame or creates a new one or establishes different archetypes?
I think it goes back to what I was saying before about we look at a campaign as a holistic thing, and we look and see, are we repeating similar mechanisms in a way that feels redundant rather than that feels like we're exploring that mechanism. And so by designing choosing villains who have a wide range of ability sets and a wide range of ways that they can be presented, we're able to design scenarios that have that require very different approaches from the players.
So the way the game is sold, right? You have the core set and you have these expansions over time. So when you're creating player cards, for example, how much are you looking at those player cards as part of this larger pool? And let's set aside the environments for a minute. I know that's another hot topic in the community, but setting that aside, let's just assume there's all the player cards are one thing. You know, how much generally traditionally in designs are you thinking about cards in relation to older things? Or are you thinking about them primarily in the context of this box that someone may have purchased and is like a self-contained thing?
So the most important thing, or the most important factor in a card design is that it must work well in the deck that it comes in, because a significant portion of our community plays pre-constructed decks only. They don't interact with deck building at all. And so we want to give them the best experience possible with the deck as we present it to them. But from beyond that point, we can start looking at how healthy a card is for the wider card pool. For instance, when I was designing Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., preparations were very much a thing on my mind, because I wanted to go back and I wanted to give Black Widow, who is very much tied to S.H.I.E.L.D. and spies and that whole oeuvre of the Marvel Universe, more tools that she could play with. I wanted her to feel very good playing with the cards and the scenarios within the Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. wave. And so we do certainly take a look back at heroes that maybe we love to play in the past and are like, oh, I wish this hero had something new for them. What can I come up with? Or how can I adjust this design so that it fits better into my favorite heroes deck? Or creates a new archetype for a favorite hero of mine.
So is that something that, I mean, I guess I'll just ask, how much is that a consideration? You know, are we ever going to see events with the arrow keyword to go back and give Hawkeye some life? Are we ever going to see, you know, stuff like, so how much are you combing through these old things thinking like, well, there's never been any arrow cards, and then make some attack events at the arrow trader or stuff like that?
So as I said, it must make sense in the deck that it appears in. So the next time we do a bow and arrow hero, maybe there are aspect cards that have the arrow trait on them. But we haven't done such a hero to this point, and so that's why we haven't gone to that well at this time.
Okay, fair enough. Well, getting back to currently where the game is at, what do you see, either as Tony or as the design team, speaking on behalf of them, where do you see the meta of the game right now?
That's a very broad question. So just kind of touching on some things that I feel are common among decks that I've been seeing people talk about are, one, chump blocking is very much a thing, a reliance on allies even. Part of what I've wanted to do with recent designs is push people away from having like 8, 10, 12 allies in their deck, because there's only so many allies in the game, and if you're including the same ones in every deck, that to me feels boring. That creates gameplay that's very samey over time. And so for instance, with Echo's pre-constructed deck, we introduced a new archetype of the ally-less deck, where you're incentivized to have no allies in your deck. And so I thought that very much kind of fits my play style. I very rarely play an ally. I usually only play an ally if Well, first of all, I only include maybe 3 or 4 in any particular deck I build, and I usually only play them if I don't have any pressing issue to deal with. If I've already got all my upgrades and stuff in play and I don't need to play the attack event this turn or the thwart event, that's when I'll play my ally. So ally reliance is one thing. Another thing that we've kind of been seeing a lot of is just kind of an abundance of basic cards in decks that have a large contingency of basic cards. And that's a harder topic to tackle because the genie's kind of already out of the bottle in as far as basic cards go, unless we're talking about environments. So maybe kind of starting to dip into that discussion. One of the things that the current environment does for us is it lets us mold the card pool to what we think is a more healthier place. And so one thing that I've been pushing for with our current and upcoming designs is that we have fewer generally good basic cards. We'll still include certain cards that maybe like your Quinn Carrier that is locked to a trait, but we'll do fewer cards that are just good across a large swath of decks, because playing a lot of basic cards means regardless of whatever your chosen aspect, your deck is still going to be like 20, 30, even more percent the same cards. And so we really want to encourage you to lean on your aspect cards more than your basic cards. So circling back to the question about what else is the meta, I feel like the meta of the game is very much a kind of a what in competitive mode is, or in competitive games is called a control play style, where the player is heavily incentivized to deal with the minion right away, deal with the side scheme right away. And you're basically trying to keep your opponent's board, your opponent being the villain, keep it clear of cards as much as possible while you build up your incremental advantages over time until you reach a point where you can basically just burn down the villain in a turn or two. And so we've been approaching that in a couple of different ways. For one, we've been making the second stage of villains a lot more punchy than the first stage of the villain, so that when you go to that second stage, you're really going to feel it a lot more. And we've also been putting more health onto the second stage than the first stage. That way you are less likely to be able to just kill that second stage without it ever being able to activate against you. I took a slightly different approach with that particular issue in the Baron Zemo scenario, where I basically said the scenario only advances at the start of the villain phase, which gives you the opportunity to actually start attacking Zemo directly rather than simply removing counters from the board members, because I wanted you to actually feel Baron Zemo attack you at his full force at least once. And Kingpin has a similar design where you only advance to taking on Kingpin directly at the start of the villain phase, because I don't want you to be able to leave the villain on 1 health, go to that next, go through the encounters, the villain stage with that weaker villain, and then completely burn down the second stage of the villain as quickly as possible, never having encountered it. And so that's one way that we've been encouraging a more, what we would consider like a tempo play style, where you are maybe dealing with the problems that you're facing, but you also have to consider, is it maybe better for me to advance my win condition? Or we've even been trying to print cards that encourage aggressive play styles where you're just going to face tank every hit, and you're going to go and hope that you can burn down the villain faster than they can burn you down. We want these all to be valid, viable play styles in the game.
That's incredibly difficult to balance villains across all those play styles.
Yeah.
In a traditional competitive card game meta, it self balances to a degree, right? If the control
Hmm.
play styles get too oppressive, other things will come up that will eventually counter that. But in
Hmm.
this one, you talked about some of the dominant things, and I was going to ask you about turtling, or this concept that players, I think, in this game learned pretty early on. And some people have said it's because of some of the early scenarios explicitly teach you this as a player
Hmm.
to sit and wait and build while the pressure is lower. And then I see a lot of these decks that just flip, and the goal is then to just burn the entire second stage down without ever interacting at it.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's super fun. Like, I guess it's a cool experiment and you did it, achievement unlocked. But if
Hmm.
you consistently do that, you're just missing out on some of the game. And
Yeah.
one of the things, to circle back, here's the bagel again, coming back to Civil War, is that I really enjoyed this fact that once you flip it, it just can't take any more damage. Like, that's it.
Hmm.
You
Yeah.
flipped the villain, and now whatever. And so I don't know if the future is when you defeat the first stage, the player phase just ends. That's it. It would just immediately go to the villain phase, or like you said, it can only begin like you do with Baron Zemo, or it's a Civil War. Some way to force you to interact that second stage, because a lot of the second stages, like the Green Goblin early on, he flips that last stage, it gives you 3 encounter cards. Well, those encounter cards don't matter if you just burn it all down in one phase.
Right.
So you're
Right.
essentially not even interacting with it at all. So it's good
Hmm.
to hear you all talking about that. And I hope there's going to be some kind of new strategies, new ways. How did you feel about the Civil War twist on that?
Yeah, I thought that was it was very important for that game style because Caleb wanted to allow the possibility of comebacks. He didn't want to
Mm,
let players just completely steamroll the villain, or the leader rather, uh, because they got such a strong start. And so it kind of was a necessity for the competitive mode to make games not feel like they're over sooner
mm,
than they should be. But I think it's also a very interesting. It's maybe a little heavy-handed as out of necessity, because all of those leaders needed to function kind of the same way for competitive balance. But it is an interesting way of making it so that you have to face that second stage of the villain. And so it's certainly one direction we can go, and there are others that we are going in future products that I can't go into yet, but there's more on this meta shifting element to come.
Yeah, I love the decision point when you get near the end of the first stage of the villain and you're sitting there and it's like, okay, we're on the 3rd out of 4 players' turns. There's like 10 health left. We really need to get this down, because if we don't, we're going to essentially waste an entire round, because 10 damage won't last very long next time.
Yeah.
So then it's like, okay, well, we have to prioritize pushing the last few points of damage, otherwise we're really behind. And that's
Hmm.
interesting. Like, and then in the second stage, of course, the second half of that is that it then creates this instance where you have to then interact with it, which is nice.
Yeah.
Um, but going back to the core set, I said a minute ago that I think there's some lessons that the core set teaches you. Do you think about that at all? And what lessons do you think the core set teaches new players? If that is the on ramp for a new player to come in, what do you think they learn when they play the pre-constructed decks against Rhino, Claw, and Ultron? And how much of those lessons are you taking into each box when you make it?
I think the number one lesson that comes out of the core set is to fear advance, because that is the card that ends so many Rhino games. Just kind of, it feels like it comes out of nowhere too. And so I think that's a lesson. I don't know if that's a good lesson. One thing that we've been trying to do more of is design more scenarios with multiple main schemes to kind of lessen the possibility of that one-off advance just ruining your day and ending your
Hmm.
game. So that is a design lesson that we have taken from the meta and are using to inform our future designs. Um, other Other lessons taken from the core set. That's an interesting question. Um, Ultron is certainly teaches you that for certain scenarios, you need to be able to deal with a lot of minions.
Mm.
So you need to have the ability to take on a lot of little enemies. Whereas like Claw, at least with his standard mod sets, teaches you about facing off against big chunky minions because he's got those masters of evil who are all
Mm-hmm.
pretty tough to deal with. Um, I think Claw teaches a lesson that boost cards are very swingy, or at least
Mm.
that's the lesson I've taken from Claw, because he can go from anywhere from like 0 damage to 6, and you never know
Mm-hmm.
what it's going to be with him. And so that is a good thing for players to know. I think going into future scenarios is that you gotta plan for those boost cards. There is that random element, so you can't assume that you are safe if the villain's attack stat is lower than your current hit point level.
Yeah. And speaking of assuming, how much knowledge do you assume on a player's behalf when you are designing a campaign expansion? For example, Fear No Evil. Do you assume that the average player who's getting into this has played a number of expansions? They have a number of other heroes, they've seen other mechanics? Or are you assuming that every single person is coming straight from the core set on ramp into whatever expansion you've given them?
We generally design assuming that whatever expansion we're working on is the player's next stop after the core set. And I think that's especially true of Fear No Evil because Daredevil is such a well-known hero that I think it will be a lot of players' next purchase after the core set. And that's why I intentionally designed him to be as straightforward as I could while still keeping him interesting for our longtime players and really capturing the vibe of that hero. But one thing we do in as far as assuming knowledge or even skill at the game is we start that first scenario at a low level of difficulty, like I mentioned before, and then we ratchet up the difficulty as you go through the campaign because we assume most players, even if they're not playing campaign mode, will probably play that first scenario out of the box first.
Hmm.
There may be the rare person who's like, oh, I really want to fight Apocalypse, so I'm going to go straight to Apocalypse next in this campaign box. But for the most part, we expect people will play through them in the campaign order.
Yeah. Are you a campaign mode guy?
I I like both. I do
Hmm.
like playing one-offs, but I also do like playing the campaign mode. Um, yeah, I find both directions fun. Campaigns are a challenge to design because we're always trying to do something different with them. And the Fear No Evil one is kind of a crazy design because not only can you um, mix and match your villain with your main scheme, you can also play the main scheme villain pairings in any order in that one. And so that was a challenge for us because, as I said, we don't know which scenario and which villain pairing that you're going to play first. And so we do actually, I'm trying to remember, I think in the rulebook we have a recommended play order, at least on villains, that gives you the level of both their difficulty and their complexity, so that new players who have just come off of the core set will at least know the difficulty level of at least half of the scenario that they're going to be playing.
Hmm. Um, let's take a turn for the worse here, Tony. And I got to ask about negative player experiences.
Uh-huh.
Negative player experiences are just a thing; they happen.
Yep.
Do you have specific ones that you've seen from past waves or cards or scenarios that stick in your mind when you're designing a new product?
Certainly. So for me, some of the negative play experience, the things that are the most negative of a play experience are losing cards out of hand, especially random cards,
Yes.
having stuff that I played onto the board discarded,
Mm.
and just like not letting me do the thing I designed my deck to do. Um, there, there is a fine line to walk there where if we just let players do what their deck intends to do the entire game, what's the point of the encounter card, right? You can just
Yeah.
basically what they call goldfishing in competitive games where you're just drawing hands, playing out cards, assuming that your opponent is not interacting with you at all. That's not very fun. So we do
Mm.
need to throw wrinkles in the way sometimes, but there are some ways that there are better ways of doing them than others. So like Caught Off Guard is a classic card in the standard
Mhm.
set. It gives you the choice of which upgrade or support you're going to discard. Uh, that we could have made that card more difficult, and we did in standard 2 by saying you have to discard your highest cost one, which is less fun because you that it takes that control away from you. And as I mentioned with losing cards out of hand, if I get to choose the card, it feels less bad than if it's just a random card
Mhm.
where I have a 1 in 6 chance of losing the one card that I was planning to play this turn.
Yeah.
And so you had mentioned earlier the space pirates taking cards out of your deck. That's
Mm.
an interesting mechanic, but it is also a very high randomness mechanic
Mm.
because maybe it's taking a card out of your deck that was a hero kit card you weren't planning to play with your particular strategy. Now it has thinned your deck and made it faster for you to get to the cards that you were planning to play. Or maybe it removes the key card in your deck that you were
Yeah.
intending to build your whole strategy around, and
Yeah.
now you're basically like, okay, why play? I'm just gonna scoop.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's interesting. And to me it comes down, and this is just I'm not a game designer, but I am a game player. Uh to me it's agency, right? It
Yes.
comes down to when I have choices. So when the counter
Yeah.
deck throws things at me, I don't want a goldfish, like you said. I want a challenge. That's why I'm playing the game.
Mhm.
Playing a game is at its core just essentially creating a bunch of obstacles for myself that I can then overcome. So that's what we're here for.
Yeah.
But I would rather it be my choice, and not just in terms of choosing what card to discard. I want the encounter deck to throw problems at me that
Mhm.
I will use my resources to solve.
Mhm.
That is so much more enjoyable than just reducing the resources that I have. Like
Right.
that just feels bad in a way. Like I would just rather the board give me more problems and now let me figure out how to solve them with the resources I have, rather than just draining those resources. And it feels like, well, not either I lost my key card or I just there's fewer things I can do. That's just less fun.
Yeah.
Um, I love Cut Off Guard. I think that's a fun card because we play all these things, and sometimes turn one, I'm like, all right, I got Ant-Man's helmet. I'm ready to go. This is going to be a great game. And then Caught Off Guard's like, well, no, I don't. Well, that sucks,
Mhm.
but
Mhm.
sometimes you lose something that's irrelevant and it's okay. So it's just
Yeah.
about
It's
having agency.
yeah. It's a card. Caught Off Guard, I think, is an interesting card for the standard set, because it's much like a competitive game. It keeps you honest. You have to play assuming that your opponent has it, because in the case of this game, your opponent does have it, and it may end up coming out or it may end up as a boost card. You may never see it. So it does keep you honest and makes you play a little bit more conservatively, assuming that, oh, I need to have contingencies in place should I get caught off guard. And I think it's important for the game to have certain cards like that, or like Advance. I know people hate Advance, but I think it's important that the encounter deck have a way of surprising you with threat.
Yes.
Otherwise, you would know for sure that if I go to Alter Ego this turn, there's no way the villain can scheme through. And that to me, I think relieves a lot of tension out of the game, which makes for a weaker game.
I 100% agree. I'm not one of those players who hates advance. I think it's fine to lose by advance. I actually think it's fine to just lose, period. Like
Mm,
if I find myself winning too often, I will get bored. Like that the whole point of playing this is to challenge and see if I can do it.
yeah.
So I like the randomness, and you have to have that randomness. Otherwise, what are you doing, right? But I just want to be able to have control over like my part of it and be able to combat that and have a good game on my side.
Hmm. Yeah.
Um,
But it's certainly speaking about negative play experiences, it definitely is a thing that we are always cognizant of, because there are some game mechanisms or designs that seem like a good idea but are just not fun to play against. It
Hmm.
functions, it works well mechanically, but it just is not fun to play against. And so those are things that we're always on the lookout for, is where are those pain points? Is there some way we could tweak a design that might not be fun right now to make it more fun, like give you more agency or make it less random, doing these things to make the design feel better? Because we don't just want a well-crafted scenario, or I should say part of the definition of a well-crafted scenario to us is one that is fun to play, not just one that functions.
Yeah. Do you have a good example of one of those that where you maybe started with something and you really liked it? It was clever, it was unique, it was interesting, and then you played it and people were like, "This kind of stinks, Tony, and I don't. This isn't fun to play. Like, it is very clever, but I don't enjoy doing it." And then, how did you change out of that?
That's a good question. I'm trying to think
No,
of
boom
a
guy. All my
specific
designs are fun. I've never had
of
that
a
problem.
specific example. Um, Nothing specific is coming to mind, but there have definitely been things in the past where people are like, I'm just not having fun playing this. I think one mechanism that tends to be kind of a not very fun play experience is just villain healing, because it's like that's not making the game harder, it's
Mm.
making the game longer, and that is not in
Hmm.
itself an interesting thing. And so I tend to be very sparing in healing effects, for the reason that I want the game to play at a relatively quick pace. I don't want the game to outlast its welcome. I don't want you to
Mm.
get bored with it. And so having games end, I think the one thing about doing those big turns that burn the villain down that's good about them is that you have put your engine together, you get to run it once, you've got the satisfaction of that, and the game ends at that point. So that is a good thing of them.
Mm.
But it does come with some negative elements that we are trying to address in various ways going forward.
Yeah. What? Speaking of, taking a long time, how could we almost wait 7 years to get Daredevil, Tony? Like, this is incredible. He's a popular character. He's not one of my favorites, but he's incredibly popular. People have been
Yeah.
pining for Daredevil for years. What took so long with Daredevil?
So he was, as long as I've been on the team, he was always in consideration. Um, part of the reason it took this long was that we had a plan of thematically tied products that we wanted to get through,
Hmm.
and so we hadn't found the opportunity to slot him in where it made sense thematically. And that is something that, as cool of an idea as it was to have these trilogies of campaign boxes that we could go through in order and they all made thematic sense and we could have overarching stories carry between them, it did create problems like this where we have an extremely popular character in Daredevil taking this long to come into the game. And so our ethos going forward has really shifted to more about what is the coolest thing we can put out next, rather than what is the most thematic thing that we can put out next. And
Mm.
so that is going to be a shift that we're going to be doing. I mean, Daredevil was kind of part of that. We had been planning for him to come after Civil War already, but we had actually had ideas for another trilogy of street level campaigns that we're actually we've pivoted away from, and we're going a different direction because we're always asking ourselves, what is the most exciting thing we could do next?
Mm. Okay. Um, there was discussion a year and a half ago at this point about revisiting old heroes. And I know you can't talk
Mhm.
about future unannounced products, but when we talk about that idea, do you have some idea in your mind of how old a hero would be to get revisited? Do you have ideas of certain characters in your mind? You don't have to tell me them, but do you have certain ones already immediately in mind that were like, these guys are going to get, or these ladies are going to get a revisit? And is that because they're popular, because you like them, because they didn't work the first time, or, tell me about these revisits.
So definitely it is the level of popularity of the character, and also how long it's been since we've had them in print. Because obviously Captain America and Doctor Strange are two of the most popular heroes in Marvel, and not having them in print is something that we want to move away from. And so those are high on our priority list in getting back into print. And at this point, basically everybody from the first wave of heroes has been long out of print. And so we want those well-known characters to be in circulation as much as possible, but we also want to do them in a way that is exciting for our longtime players who have already bought that hero and have played that hero a lot. We don't want them to just be a new coat of paint or anything like that. We are doing completely new designs, complete reimaginings of how these characters function, how we represent their skill sets in the game, and making them a new experience for old players and new players alike.
That's an incredible opportunity. Like most of these characters you mentioned, Doctor Strange and Captain America, they go back decades. They have a rich history in comics, and every time a new comic writer comes along, they've got a slightly different interpretation. They want to take it a little darker. They want to take create a new backstory, whatever it may be. I'm not a huge comics reader, but these things happen. And you get to do that from your side now of like, okay, we had, sticking with Captain America, we had that version of him. He was like, I think the very first hero pack in the entire game. And there is, we know what Captain America is, but now you get to come at it and say, but look at all the other ways Captain America has been over the years, and we can reimagine that. That's got to be super exciting for you guys.
It is. It's a challenge as well, because we want to be true to the character. And many of these characters, like basically all of them, can be interpreted in many different ways. And in fact, we've kind of done that already with Spider-Man Peter Parker and Spider-Man Miles Morales and Ghost Spider and Silk. We have characters with similar power sets done in very different ways. And so being able to do these well-known characters as themselves in a new way is also very exciting as well. But we do want to make sure that the experience is one that feels fresh and new to players who have played the original versions.
That's super exciting. As obviously as a longtime player, that's good for me to hear that it's going to be a totally new version, and I think that's super exciting. So I'm really excited to, whenever we get around to that, to see those heroes. And for the new players who who joined the game, with the mutants, I think the mutants were a huge boon to the game. And so we got a lot of new players then, just anecdotally from people I've met. They may have missed those, they got in with Mutant Genesis and like, oh, you can't really get Xbox or Y hero pack anymore, but now you'll be able to get at least a version of those. And that's really cool.
Yeah.
Okay. Environments. There's been a lot of discussion about environments. Can you explain to me what the environments are? Just refresh me, and then let's talk about what they mean for you as a design team.
So we have 3 different environments. There is the current environment, which consists of the most recently published products, and our current environment goes back to Age of Apocalypse, the Age of Apocalypse wave, and everything from there forward is in the current environment. Then we have the legacy environment, which is everything ever printed. The limited environment is basically a pick your own environment, where basically you can put constraints on your own deck building by saying, I'm only taking these campaign boxes and these heroes, and I'm going to build a deck out of them. And so the real purpose, the environments serve a number of purposes. The biggest purpose that they serve for us on the design side is letting us, as I mentioned before, kind of shape the card pool that we want to have players really focusing on at any one point in time. It kind of gives us a freedom to, if there is a card design that we feel is too strong, takes up too much design space in the card pool, we can kind of leave that in the past, and players who want to play with it can still do so, but it doesn't constrain us in our future designs. As an example, the card Home Technique, which I mentioned before, is a staple in aggression that, for those unfamiliar, increases the damage that your attack events do by their cost. And to me, that card was a little bit of a band-aid for the early aggression attack events, which I think are pretty widely considered to be under the power curve and weren't seeing a lot of play. And so that was, I think, a clever way of bringing them kind of up to the power level and make them more exciting and make players want to play the 3, 4, even 5 cost attack events in their deck. Whereas mostly in the past, players have gravitated toward the 0, 1, or 2 cost events so they can play multiples of them, hit multiple different targets. That card has kind of, though, had a warping effect on our design space by saying every attack event we print in aggression has to have that card in mind when we're designing it. And so by saying that Home Technique is in the past, we're fine with people playing with it. We're fine if they use it with this new card, but we don't think that we have to balance this new card for Home Technique. Gives us the freedom to make cards that are more exciting to play on their own rather than requiring you to have this 3, 4, 5-year-old card in order to get value out of them.
So is this kind of your answer to something like a taboo list or a ban list? Essentially, you can do that without really doing it by just sculpting the environment to current?
Kind of. My hesitation is that Arkham also has the environments, but they also were the ones who originated the taboo list. So one thing, we've never had any kind of a restricted list of cards for your deck in this game. And that's something that I kind of pride myself on, because in Marvel Champions, the message, the ethos that Caleb Grace, one of the core game designers of the game, instilled in me when I joined the team was that this game is all about player empowerment. We want the player to feel like a superhero. And so we have approached it from the lens of, if this card is too good, that's okay. If players want to feel powerful by playing it, they can. If they think it's warping the game or they don't find it fun because it's too good, they can choose not to play with it. And that's one of the great things about a cooperative game, is it's really up to the players what they want to play. You don't have to play something just because it is the top of the meta, as we discussed with competitive games. If you want to win a tournament, you have to play the best cards. If you want to win a game at Marvel Champions, you don't have to play the best cards. You can play the cards you enjoy the most. And so we have always had this ethos of, we're not going to ban cards. We've done very minimal balance errata, and we've only errated cards that had negative impacts on future designs. For instance, Cosmo was a card that his original version could discard the top of any deck, but with certain designs that have like special side decks, that could break scenarios. And so for our ability to have the most broad design terrain to cover, we felt that it was important to errata Cosmo so that he can only target a player deck or the encounter deck. That way he cannot break scenarios in ways that are unintended.
Yeah, I think that's important. And, I've dabbled in Arkham. I played a fair bit of Lord of the Rings, Living Card Game. But one of the things I love about Marvel Champions is that I can just look at the cards and play the cards. I don't have to wonder, do I got to check this month's taboo list because, I don't know if this was changed up or down, and I don't know if I have the best version of this card. And that's kind of overwhelming. And like you said, I think it goes against the ethos of the game, which is just approachability, power scan, like just have fun. This is a superhero power fantasy. Just go for it.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to make you feel bad and miserable like we are in Arkham. I'm trying to make you feel good and have a good time.
Right.
And people enjoy the misery in Arkham. I'm saying that, in jest, right? But that is how the
Yeah.
game makes you feel. I'm just slowly
Hmm.
being strangled. And some people like that feeling. And some people want to feel like, I don't know, Spider-Man and kick somebody in the face. But I
Yep.
like that I don't have to wonder, is this card been changed or errata? And there's very few. I was going to ask you about errata, so I'm glad you brought that up. So when you
So
are, go ahead.
if I can, going back
Yeah.
to your question of comparing the current environment to the taboo list, you could kind of think of the current environment as kind of a simplified taboo list, in that we are saying that these products most most exemplify our current design ethos. And so we think these are the best cards that follow the rules as we are currently employing them for the game, for design, for level balancing, difficulty balancing. And so if you want to challenge yourself to playing with the cards that we feel are the most fair, you can play within the current environment. And that presents an easy way for you to know that by just knowing, oh, everything from these products was designed with the same levels, the same guidelines, the same benchmarks, and I can feel confident that the designers intended them to work together.
Mm. I mean, to me, and I think this is true, but I'll ask you, is the current environment essentially shorthand for what is currently in print and for sale also? Like, is that intentional that those overlap? Is that coincidental, or do I have that wrong?
Not 100% true, but it is somewhat true in that they are the most recent products. And so for the most part, they are in print. We've recently had a reprinting of Next Evolution, even though it was rotated out of the current environment. But for the most part, you can expect if something is in the current environment, you'll still be able to find it on a store shelf.
When you're designing for the current environment, do you sit down and think like, I'm going to plan out the whole current environment, like the next 2 or 3 cycles, whatever the environment ends up being. And you're thinking, I'm going to do the whole thing, from an overarching perspective, maybe not thematically, like you said, but mechanically. I'm thinking about, I'm going to introduce this archetype in the first wave, and I want to, bring it up in the second wave. And by the third one, I want to kind of rotate and push against it. Or are you designing waves more independently of the environment? Or how does that look like from your end?
So let me preface this by saying that we only started designing with the current environment in mind toward the end of the Fear No Evil wave. So basically, Fear No Evil was nearly completely designed and was in testing when the decision was made that we were going to do the current environment kind of split.
Okay.
And so the cards that are currently in print and the ones that are on the market at the moment do not really reflect the design ethos of the current environment. It's going to be the wave following Fear No Evil, where the current environment is really going to kind of appear. It's really going to have impacted our design, because by the time we decided to do the current environment, Fear No Evil was kind of where it was basically done at that point, with some balance tweaking and things, but things were already so far along that it didn't make sense for us to go back and redesign things just to work within the current environment. Obviously, they were designed with the wider environment, the legacy environment in mind, you could say, because there was no current environment at the time we were designing them. So they're very much still designed to interact with things. But I think it's kind of funny because the introduction of the martial artist keyword is kind of, you could think about that because it's a new thing, it kind of makes sense to be within the current environment, because people prior to that who might have warranted that trait don't have it. And so going forward, we can put the martial artist trait on heroes who it makes sense on. But it was kind of self-contained in that regard. but going back to your original question, which was no, we are not designing 3 full years of product at the same time. That is just not a reasonable thing for us to do. But basically, what we are doing is we are directing our play testers to focus their testing efforts within the current environment. So they are testing our new cards with a focus on the current environment, though they still do playtest outside of that in the legacy environment, just to make sure there aren't easy changes we could make to make things work with every card to avoid those really obvious broken combos. And we are also, as a design team, we are thinking about whether we want to have a particular card in the current environment, because if we do want it in the current environment, that means we need to reprint it in somebody. And so talking about how Fear No Evil was nearly done when current environments became a thing, had I known about the current environment when I was designing Silk, I may have made some different decisions about which cards I reprinted in her, because I didn't know at the time that Sinister Motives was not going to be available to people. So I may have made some different choices in terms of what reprints she got in her deck, knowing that we wanted to keep those cards in print and available to people. And so those are really kind of the biggest considerations, is our testing and our assessment of what we want the card pool to currently contain, what combos we want to currently enable, as we are putting together our decks and deciding on what reprints we want.
Well, I have a few questions to kind of wrap up here that are a little shorter, maybe less difficult, but hopefully interesting. I'm curious if you could tell me, how do you explain to people who don't know anything about Marvel Champions what Marvel Champions is? You know, you go to a social event, as one does. People are talking about what they do for work, as they always do. And it comes to you and they say, oh, what do you do for work, Tony? And you say, you know, I'm a card game designer. And they say, well, what game? And they've never heard of Marvel Champions. How do you explain fairly quickly to someone who doesn't play a lot of games what Marvel Champions is?
So first of all, when people hear that I'm a game designer, their question is not as much what game, but like Monopoly. That is usually the first thing that people go to. Like, games like Monopoly, and it's like, kind of, but not really. But yeah. So yeah, my elevator pitch for Marvel Champions is that it is a game that puts you in the mask of a super Marvel Universe superhero, where you are punching the villain to prevent them from doing their dastardly scheme.
That's a pretty short answer. Can you tell me, in all the stuff you've designed, what is your favorite hero that you've designed so far? Like, either whether to as a fun wise or just mechanically, you think is the most, like, what you flexed your creative muscle the most? Like, what's the one that you really enjoy the most?
That's a hard one. It's almost like choosing a favorite child. But just like choosing a favorite child, your oldest is always your favorite, is my feeling. And so I'd probably have to go with Domino, who was like my very first hero design. I was recently talking to one of my coworkers, Reed, who is a new designer for Arkham Horror, the living card game, and he was talking about how he had all these brilliant ideas that he wanted to put into his first design, and it really reminded me of my early designs, where it's like I've never had a chance to make something before, and so I'm just brimming with ideas that I want to try to shove them all into this one design, but I quickly learned that no, I should hold some of those back. Not everything is going to fit in here. You want a cohesive design. You don't want it to be overly complicated. And I think Domino, she's just got so many decision points that I think she's really high on the brain burny scale. And so as much fun as I have playing her, I've certainly tried to pull myself back from kind of her level of decision making, just so that they're easier to play because we always want to keep the game as approachable as we can for new players, particularly with popular characters like Daredevil. Yeah, just there's so many decision points in her that you feel exhausted by the time you get to a game with her.
That's true. Do you have the same kind of complexity ramping or difficulty ramping that you mentioned with villains in a box? You say it kind of goes from the first to the last. Do you have the same thing with hero packs? The first two in the box are going to be pretty straightforward, and then they get more difficult as they come out, or no?
Not really. So our complexity level on heroes tends to be kind of inversely proportional to their popularity. So like our Daredevil hero is probably one of the simpler ones in that wave, if not the simplest one, because we expect so many brand new players to want to gravitate toward playing him, to want to play him straight after the core set. Whereas our lesser known heroes like Echo, we have a lot more leeway in terms of making them more complex, because we figure if you're playing somebody like Echo, you're either really deep into the game and have explored all the other heroes already, or you're really deep into the Marvel lore. And so you've probably also been playing the game a long time. And so it gives us more freedom to make them a little more complex, assuming a little bit more knowledge or experience on the part of the player by the time they get to playing them.
And I suppose there's less pressure, right? Like there's certain characters that are just so omnipotent and popular that you just have to get them right in this. Like you just, to use a baseball analogy, you just kind of got to get on base with Daredevil. And like Spider-Man, you can't strike out. You just got to get on base. But like, I don't know, Vision and Echo, like maybe you just swing for the fences. And if it's amazing, it's amazing. And if it's not, like, everybody is someone's favorite hero, but fewer people are going to be upset, right? Like, that's Wolverine, like he can't suck. Like Wolverine's got to be like good, and Daredevil's the same thing. Well, as I mentioned earlier on, we are on the cusp of Fear No Evil, so let's end there. Let's just, it's about to come out, so I kind of want to hear your elevator pitch. If I'm a new player, I just played the core set, why should I pick up Fear No Evil? Like, what is so special about Fear No Evil?
It has Daredevil in it and Kingpin.
Done.
That's really all you need to know. We really are expecting that one to sell on the big names. If you're still not convinced, for our veteran players, what it provides is a lot of variability in play. You have your modular villains with your modular main schemes that create a great variety of different setups that you can play. You have a campaign that you can play in any order except for Kingpin, who always comes last. And it just it creates a lot of replayability for both the campaign and the non-campaign mode.
And if you were going to pick a hero, and it can't be Daredevil for this answer, that you think players are really going to enjoy, because everyone's going to go unpack Daredevil, right? But what's the kind of dark horse hero that you think people are going to maybe slow burn into or be really surprised by how fun they are?
I don't know. I mean, all of the heroes in this wave are really strong designs. And that's not just me tooting my own horn. That was because 2/3 of them were designed by my coworkers, Frank and Aaron, and they just did fantastic work on all of them. I think based on the what I've been seeing from the community is that there's maybe less enthusiasm for Luke than for Jessica and Daredevil, but I think Luke is a really fun hero to play with as well. I think you can't go wrong with any of the heroes in this wave. And I'm super excited for the last two to get announced, because they have some really exciting designs as well that I think people are just gonna really gravitate towards. I am so proud of the work that we did on this wave.
Awesome. Yeah, we haven't seen Elektra and Iron Fist, so we know who they are, but we don't know anything about them yet.
Hmm.
Whenever news comes out, I'm sure the internet will lose its mind. Discord will be going crazy. Is it anything else you want to finish with here, Tony? I think I asked all the questions I have, and I appreciate you being here. But anything you want to say to people who are listening to this?
No, it's been great to just kind of talk design and talk about my ethos as the lead game designer on the game. And there's just so much cool stuff coming for this game that I wish I could talk about all of it, but just it is coming. There's a long bright future for Marvel Champions.
Awesome. Well, you are, as always, a gentleman. Thanks for coming on. It's always great to see you here. I always enjoy seeing you at the conventions. Thank you. And we look forward to Fear No Evil, of course, and everything else you guys have coming out. So thanks a lot, and we'll see everybody next time. Bye.
Bye.